Chapter 1. The meeting in Midgard in the golden halls of Asgard, where the gods feasted and the echoes of battle never faded. Thor, the god of thunder, sat on a stone bench at the edge of Valhalla. His gaze rested on Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that glittered in the sunlight and led to the world of humans, Midgard. Mjolnir, his mighty hammer, lay beside him, but today his thoughts were not on war or glory. A vision had haunted him, a woman with hair like autumn leaves and eyes as deep as the sea. He couldn't explain it, but something drew him to her, as if the Norns themselves had woven their fates together. Thor rose, his red cloak fluttering in the wind, and his heart beat with a new, unexpected warmth. "Heimdall," he called, his voice like a thunderclap that made the crystals in Valhalla's ceiling tremble. "Open, Bifrost." "I must go to Midgard." Heimdall, with eyes that saw through worlds, nodded. "I have seen her, Thor, a woman of Midgard, strong in spirit but frail in body. Be careful, Thunder God. Your heart is like a storm, wild and hard to control." Thor laughed, a sound that made the clouds quiver. "Do not worry, Heimdall, I shall be gentle as a spring breeze." With determined steps, he stepped onto Bifrost, and the rainbow's colors enveloped him. He landed in a city called Stockholm, where autumn leaves swirled in the wind and people hurried past, unaware that a god walked among them. To blend in, Thor had dressed in human clothes. A red sweater that strained over his broad shoulders, jeans that barely contained his powerful legs, and a cap that hid his golden hair. His steps were heavy, but his heart was light. He didn't know exactly where she was, but a divine instinct guided him to a park at the city's heart. There, on a bench beneath an oak tree, sat she, Ira. Her hair glowed like autumn leaves, and her eyes shimmered like the sea. She was reading a book, unaware that fate was approaching. Thor stopped, his breath catching. She was even more beautiful than in his vision. He took a step forward, his shadow falling over her. "Hello," he said, his voice rumbling but kind. "I am Thor, just Thor, may I sit?" Ira looked up, surprised. The man before her seemed to step out of a Viking saga. His blue eyes sparkled, and his presence was electric. "Sure," she said with a smile, "the park is for everyone." "What are you reading?" "Wait, it's me who's reading." "What brings you here?" Thor sat, the bench creaking under his weight. He smiled, and the sound of his laughter sent birds flying from the trees. "I am here to explore. Midgard is full of wonders. Tell me about yourself, Ira." She raised an eyebrow. "How do you know my name?" Thor froze. He had forgotten humans' ignorance of divine senses. I heard someone call it," he lied. "Tell me now." Ira laughed, a sound like wind chimes. They began to talk. She spoke of her life as a librarian, surrounded by books of myths and legends. She loved the stories, but didn't believe in gods. She shared dreams of traveling to places rich with history, a longing for adventure in a quiet life. Thor listened, fascinated, his heart swelling. He told tales of Asgard, masked as family stories, battles with giants, feasts in great halls, courage and loyalty. Ira listened, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Hours flew by. The sun sank, and Ira glanced at her watch. "Oh, I must go, but it was nice, Thor. Perhaps we'll meet again. Tomorrow, same place?" asked Thor eagerly. She smiled. "Sure, tomorrow." As Ira walked home, she felt a tingling warmth. Thor was unlike anyone else, strong, charming, a bit clumsy but genuine. She wondered if this was the start of something big. Thor returned to Asgard, his thoughts filled with Ira. In Valhalla, the gods feasted, but he ignored them. Odin sat on his throne, his ravens Hugin and Munin at his side. Freya smiled, but Thor didn't notice. He went straight to Loki, who sat in a corner plotting. "Loki," Thor exclaimed, "I have met her. Ira, the most beautiful woman in Midgard. She is like a goddess." Loki raised an eyebrow, his green eyes glinting. "Love, brother, you who only love Mjolnir and ale." "Tell me more," Thor recounted, his voice bubbling with excitement. Loki listened, but in his mind, a plan grew. He envied Thor's joy and craved chaos. The next day, Thor met Ira in the park. He brought flowers from Asgard's gardens, luminous, impossible blooms. "For you," he said. Ira took them, amazed. "Where do they come from?" "They're like something from a tale," Thor grinned. "A special place. Come, let's walk." They wandered through the park, chatting about everything and nothing. Thor told of battles with serpents and giants, and Ira laughed, thinking it was a joke. She introduced him to modern music, and Thor tried to dance, his steps like small earthquakes. They shared an ice cream, and Thor didn't notice Loki, disguised as a man, lurking in the shadows. "This will be fun," Loki muttered. Weeks passed. Thor and Ira met daily. They went to the cinema, where Thor laughed at action scenes and called them wrong. At restaurants, he ate for 10, and Ira laughed at his appetite. One evening, under the stars, Thor took her hand. "Ira, you have changed me. I've never felt this way," she blushed. "You make me feel alive, Thor." They kissed, and for Thor, thunder roared in his chest. But Loki lurked nearby, planning. Thor neglected Asgard for Ira. Odin noticed but said nothing. Loki grew impatient. He wanted chaos, not love. At a picnic, Loki appeared, disguised as a friend, Lars. "Hello, old friend," he called. Thor realized it was Loki, but Ira thought he was a friend. Loki told exaggerated tales of Thor dressed as a woman, of drinking contests lost. Ira laughed, but tension built. "You're always jealous, Loki," Thor rumbled. "And you're always foolish," Loki retorted. Ira mediated, and Loki left, laughing. "Is he your brother?" Ira asked. "Adopted," Thor muttered. "Complicated." Their love grew. Thor took Ira to the mountains, where he climbed like a god. She was awestruck. Under the northern lights, he confessed, "Ira, I love you. You are my world." "I love you too, Thor," she replied. Loki planned his big move. Chapter 2. The storm breaks out. Autumn had swept over Stockholm like a cool breath from the north, the air carrying a crisp chill that nipped at cheeks and painted them red. The trees in the city's park stood in full autumn splendor, their leaves glowing in shades of red, gold, and orange, as if burning without being consumed. Streetlights cast a soft glow over the cobblestones, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sound of trams rattling through the heart of the city. For Thor and Ira, the world felt warm despite the cold, their growing love a fire that refused to die. Thor, the god of thunder, had begun to feel at home in Midgard, though his divine nature made him clumsy among humans. His red sweater, stretched tight over his broad shoulders, and jeans that barely contained his powerful legs, felt like a disguise. But Ira's smile made him forget the golden halls of Asgard and the eternal call of battle. Thor had planned an evening that would be unforgettable, a romantic dinner at a small restaurant by the shores of Mälaren, where lights reflected on the dark water, followed by a nighttime walk under the stars. He had even considered revealing the truth about who he was, Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder, wielder of Mjolnir, but the thought terrified him. Would she believe him, laugh, or worse, run away in fear? He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the evening. This was their moment, and he would not let anything or anyone ruin it. Ira, for her part, felt that her life had changed since meeting Thor. He was like a storm sweeping into her calm existence, and she loved it. His wild tales of battles and feasts, his booming laugh, his way of looking at the world with a blend of ancient wisdom and childlike enthusiasm, all drew her closer to him. But there was a secret in his eyes, a shadow that appeared when he thought she wasn't looking. She had noticed his inhuman strength, like when he effortlessly lifted a heavy bench in the park to retrieve her scarf that had blown away. His odd comments about home, as if he came from another world, and that episode with the cat he chased with such fury, all pointed to something he wasn't telling her. Yet she chose not to ask. She wanted to believe in their love, not dig into mysteries that might destroy everything. The day of their big date began with a clear sky, the sun glittering on Mälaren's water, and the wind carrying the rustle of leaves. Thor woke early in Ira's apartment, where he had slept on her sofa. The bed was too small for his divine frame. He lay still, watching her sleep, her breathing calm, her hair spread across the pillow like an autumn crown. I must protect her, he thought, from giants, from monsters, from Loki. His brother had been too quiet since their encounter in the park, and Thor knew that silence from Loki was never a good sign. He crept into the kitchen to make breakfast, determined to show Ira he could be more than a warrior. He found flour, eggs, and milk in her pantry and attempted to make pancakes. But his divine strength was not suited for delicacies. He crushed a bowl while mixing the batter, and the stove smoked from burnt pancakes. Ira woke to the smell and laughed when she saw him, covered in flour, holding a frying pan with a sheepish grin. "You're no cook, are you?" she said, her eyes twinkling. Thor laughed, his voice like a thunderclap. "In Asgard we have cooks for that, but I'm learning, maybe." They sat at a small kitchen table, sharing the few pancakes that survived, and talked about the day. Ira told him about her job at the library, about a new exhibition on Norse mythology she was helping with. Thor listened, but his thoughts drifted to Asgard, where he knew Odin awaited him. He had ignored his father's call for weeks, and he could feel Heimdall's watchful gaze from Bifrost, ever vigilant. After breakfast, they went to the park where they usually met. Leaves crunched under their feet, and the wind carried the scent of earth and autumn. Thor had brought a small gift, a carved wooden figure of a bird secretly fetched from Asgard. "For you," he said, handing it over. "So you always have something to remind you of freedom." Ira took it, her fingers brushing the smooth wood. "It's beautiful, Thor. Where do you get all these things?" She smiled, but her eyes were curious, as if she sensed there was more to his answer than he let on. "A friend makes them," he lied, and his heart ached with the secret. They sat on their usual bench, and Ira leaned her head against his shoulder. For a moment, everything was perfect. The sun warmed their faces, birds sang, and the world felt like it belonged to them alone. But in the shadows, hidden behind a tree, stood Loki. He had transformed into an old man, with a hunched back and a cane, but his green eyes glinted with malice. He had followed Thor for days, plotting his next move. He loved seeing his brother happy, not out of joy, but because it gave him an opportunity to create chaos. "Oh, Thor," he muttered to himself, "you make it so easy." That evening, Thor met Ira outside her apartment for their date. She wore a dark blue dress that highlighted her sea-blue eyes, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Thor stared, his mouth dry, his heart pounding like Mjolnir against a giant. "You are like Freyja herself," he said without thinking. Ira laughed, her voice like a bell in the wind. "Freyja, is that another one of your tales?" Thor blushed, his cheeks hot under his beard. A compliment from my homeland." He offered her his arm, and they walked toward the restaurant, their steps synchronized as if they had always belonged together. The streets were lively, filled with people hurrying home or out for the evening. Thor felt like a stranger in this world, but with Ira by his side, he was home. The restaurant sat by Mälaren shore, a small building with wooden panels and large windows reflecting the city's lights in the water. Inside, it was warm, with candles on the tables and the scent of freshly baked bread. Thor and Ira sat at a table by the window, with a view of the dark water glittering in the moonlight. Thor ordered a meal that could feed an army: steak, potatoes, bread, and a whole pitcher of wine. Ira teased him about his appetite, and he laughed, but his eyes scanned the room, searching for signs of Loki. He was right to be cautious. In the kitchen, disguised as a cook, stood Loki, whispering to a waiter. His plan was simple but cruel, to sow discord between Thor and Ira by provoking a fight that would scare her. He had seen how Thor struggled to control his temper, and he knew one misstep could ruin everything. He handed the waiter a bowl of soup with a clear instruction: spill it on the big man by the window. Say it was an accident. The dinner started perfectly. Thor told a family story about lifting a giant to save a village, his voice lively and his gestures grand. Ira listened, her eyes sparkling with fascination. "You should write a book, Thor," she said, taking a sip of wine. "Your stories are better than anything I've read at the library." Thor smiled, but his heart ached. He wanted to tell the truth, that he was the god of thunder, that his hammer could shatter mountains, that his world was filled with gods and monsters. But how would she react? Would she believe him, laugh, run? He decided to wait, to let the evening be theirs. He reached across the table and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle against her soft skin. "Ira," he said, his voice softer than usual, "you make me happy. More than any battle, more than any feast." She blushed, her smile shy. "You're not so bad yourself, Thor." They laughed, and for a moment the world was perfect. Then it happened. The waiter, manipulated by Loki, brought a bowl of soup and accidentally stumbled, spilling the hot liquid over Thor's chest. It didn't burn his divine skin, but his anger flared like a storm. "What in Helheim's name?" he roared, his voice shaking the glasses on the table. The guests turned, and some children hid behind their parents. Ira jumped, her eyes widening. "Thor, calm down. It was an accident." She placed a hand on his arm, but he shook it off, his gaze fixed on the kitchen. Thor caught a glimpse of Loki in the corner of his eye, his green eyes gleaming from beneath the cook's hat. "Loki," he thundered, rising to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor with an echo through the room. Glasses shattered, and a woman screamed. Thor took a step toward the kitchen, his hand reaching for Mjolnir, hidden in his jacket. Outside, thunder rumbled, though the sky had been clear just minutes before. Ira grabbed his arm, harder this time. "Thor, please, sit down, you're scaring people." Loki stepped out from the kitchen, now in his true form, dressed in an elegant black suit. His smile was like a blade. "Oh, brother, so easily provoked," he said, his voice smooth but venomous. "Can't you even have dinner without causing a scene? Pathetic for a god who loves a human." Thor clenched his fists, and the thunder grew louder, the windows vibrating. "You've gone too far, Loki," he roared, and lightning illuminated the sky outside. The guests screamed, some rushing for the door, while the waiters tried to calm them. Ira stood frozen, her face pale. "Thor, what are you doing?" "What is this?" Her voice trembled, and for the first time Thor saw fear in her eyes, fear of him. Loki laughed, and his form flickered. He transformed into a crow and flew out through an open window, his laughter echoing into the night. Thor ran after him but stopped at the door, his heart sinking like a stone. He turned to Ira, who had grabbed her coat and stood by the table, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. "Ira, I can explain," he began, his voice broken. She shook her head, her voice low but firm. "I don't know what's going on, Thor, but this is too much. I need time." She turned and walked away, her steps quick and unsteady, her blue dress fluttering in the wind as she disappeared into the night. Thor stood alone in the chaotic restaurant. The guests stared, the waiters began cleaning up spilled soup and broken glass. The thunder continued to rumble, but it was weaker now, as if even the sky mourned. Thor felt more human than ever, vulnerable, alone, angry. He had lost her, and it was Loki's fault, and his own. He returned to Asgard via Bifrost, rain pouring over him, his red sweater clinging to his skin. In Valhalla's halls, he found Loki, sitting by a fire and sipping mead, his smile undisturbed. Thor stormed forward, Mjolnir gleaming in his hand. "Why, Loki?" he roared. "Why do you destroy everything I love?" Loki leaned against a pillar, his eyes glinting. "Because it's fun, brother, and because you make it so easy. Your anger is your weakness, and you never learn." Thor raised Mjolnir, but Odin, who had listened in silence from his throne, finally spoke. "Thor," he said, his voice like a thunderclap from ancient times, "you must choose your heart or your duty. Midgard is not your world. Love for a human is dangerous for you and for her." Thor lowered the hammer, his shoulders slumping. "I love her, father," he said, his voice low. "I cannot give her up." Odin sighed, his single eye glinting with wisdom and sorrow. "Then you must be stronger than your anger, my son." Thor returned to Midgard that same night, but Ira didn't answer his calls or messages. He stood outside her apartment, rain drenching him, his cap dripping with water. He knocked on the door, but no one opened. He could hear her breathing inside, but she wasn't ready to face him. He felt like a mortal, powerless against his own heart. In the shadows, hidden behind a tree, Loki watched. His smile was wide, his plans had succeeded. He had scared Ira, sown discord between her and Thor, and created the chaos he loved. But he knew the game wasn't over. Thor would try to win her back, and Loki would be ready with more chaos. Days passed, and Thor tried to reach Ira. He left flowers at her door, wrote letters he never dared send, wandered through the park where they had first met. He remembered their laughter, their kisses, their plans for a future together. He had been so close to telling the truth, but now she was gone, frightened by his anger and Loki's tricks. Ira, meanwhile, sat in her apartment, staring at the wooden bird Thor had given her. She missed him, but fear ran deep. Who was he really? Why had he acted that way? And who was Loki, this man who seemed to delight in hurting him? She wanted to believe in their love, but doubt grew like a shadow. Thor decided not to give up. He would win her back, no matter the cost. He planned a new meeting, perhaps a gesture so grand she couldn't resist, a trip to Iceland where he could show her the northern lights in all their glory. But he knew Loki would be there, ready to ruin it again. In Asgard, Loki sat forging plans. He had won this round, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to see Thor broken, his love shattered, his anger erupt in a storm that would shake the worlds. He began plotting his next move, a trick so great it might reveal Thor's true nature to Ira and scare her away forever. Thor, unaware of Loki's plans, stood by Melaren's shore, gazing out over the water. He gripped Mjolnir tightly, his heart filled with determination. He would win Ira back, and he would show Loki that love was stronger than chaos. But deep down, he knew his anger was his weakness, and that, as always, he had learned nothing from his mistakes. Chapter 3, the attempt at reconciliation. The rain had stopped, but Stockholm's streets still glistened with wet cobblestones beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. Autumn had swept in with a crisp chill that bit at the cheeks, and the wind carried the scent of damp earth and falling leaves. The trees lining the city's boulevards stood in full splendor, their crowns blazing red, yellow, and orange, as if aflame but never consumed. Lake Mälaren lay still, its surface reflecting the city's lights like a dark mirror, and somewhere in the distance came the screech of a lonely tram. Thor stood by the water's edge, his red sweater damp and clinging to his skin, his cap dripping with the last of the rain. Mjolnir rested heavily in his hand, hidden inside his jacket, but its weight was nothing compared to the burden in his heart. Ira was gone, frightened by his rage and by Loki's cruel tricks, and for the first time in his divine life, Thor felt powerless. He had defeated giants, tamed storms, and lifted mountains, but to win back a human heart, that was a battle he did not know how to fight. His thoughts were a whirlwind of memories, Ira's smile as they shared an ice cream in the park, her laughter when he stumbled during their dance, her warm hand in his beneath the stars. But now those memories were mixed with the image of her fear, her pale face in the restaurant, her quick steps as she fled. He had tried to be gentle, but his temper, as always, had ruined everything. And Loki, his brother, his tormentor, had known exactly how to ignite that spark. Thor clenched his fist around Mjolnir, and faint thunder rumbled in the distance, as if the heavens shared his sorrow. In Asgard, in the golden halls of Valhalla, Loki sat in the shadows, his green eyes glinting with satisfaction. He sipped from a goblet of mead, its sweetness a sharp contrast to the bitter joy he felt. Watching Thor suffer was a victory, but not enough. He wanted to see his brother broken, his love shattered, his rage exploding into a storm that would shake the realms. His next plan was already in motion, a trick so cunning it would force Thor to reveal his divine nature to Ira and frighten her forever. He leaned back against a pillar, the runes on Valhalla's walls glowing in the light of the eternal fires. "You are so predictable, brother," he murmured, smiling like a wolf that has tasted blood. Odin from his throne saw it all. His single eye gleamed with wisdom and sorrow, his ravens Hugin and Munin croaking at his side. He knew Thor stood at a crossroads, and that his choice would shape his destiny. Freyja, the goddess of love, sat by another fire, her golden hair shimmering. She had tried to warn Thor about Loki's nature, but he had not listened. "He is blinded by love," she whispered to herself, her voice soft but heavy with compassion. "And Loki exploits it, as always." Thor returned to Midgard early the next morning, determined to win Ira back. He had not slept, his thoughts a storm of regret and hope. He went to her apartment, his steps heavy but resolute. The streets were quiet, with only a few early joggers and a lone dog walker visible at dawn. He knocked on her door, but no one answered. He could hear her breathing inside, soft and steady, and imagined her asleep, her hair spread across the pillow like an autumn crown. He could not disturb her now. Instead, he went to a nearby flower shop, where the scent of roses and lilies filled the air. He chose a bouquet of red roses, not Asgard's magical blooms this time, but simple, earthly flowers, red as his cloak and his heart. With trembling hand, he wrote a card. "Ira, forgive me. I want to explain everything. Meet me in the park tonight by our oak." Thor, He left the bouquet at her door, the card tucked among the flowers, and walked away, his heart pounding with both hope and fear. He wandered the city, his thoughts full of her. He remembered their first meeting, how her laughter had chimed like wind bells, how her eyes sparkled as she spoke of her dreams. He had been so close to telling her the truth then, but he had lost his nerve. Now he was determined to be honest, no matter the cost. Ira woke to the sound of the city's morning traffic, trams screeching and birds singing outside her window. Her heart felt heavy, her eyes red from tears. She could not stop. She had slept little, her thoughts spinning around yesterday's chaos, Thor's anger, Loki's taunts, thunder rumbling without cause. It all felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. She sat up in bed and saw the wooden bird he had given her on her nightstand. Her fingers traced its smooth surface, and a wave of longing washed over her. She missed his booming laugh, his warm presence, his way of making the world feel larger. But the fear lingered. Who was he really, and why did it feel like he carried a secret bigger than she could comprehend? When she opened the door for her newspaper, she found the roses and the card. Her heart pounded as she read his words, his handwriting rough but sincere. She brought the bouquet inside and placed it in a vase, the scent of roses filling her small apartment. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. What had he meant when he said the world shook? And who was Loki, this man who seemed to delight in hurting him? She sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, staring out the window. The sky was grey, but the sun fought to break through the clouds, as if reflecting her own thoughts. She decided to go to the park. She deserved answers, and perhaps, just perhaps, their love could survive this. Thor spent the day in the park, by the oak where they had first met. He sat on the bench, his cap pulled low over his brow, his dark jacket traded for the red sweater again. He wanted her to recognize him. Leaves crunched beneath his boots, and the wind carried the scent of autumn and memories. He remembered their first conversation, how she spoke of her dreams of Iceland, of volcanoes and myths. He had promised to take her there, and he had meant it. If only she gave him a chance, he would show her the world, not just Midgard, but maybe even Asgard. He saw her approaching from afar, her green coat billowing in the wind, her hair glowing in the evening light. His heart pounded like Mjolnir striking a giant, and he rose, his eyes filled with hope and worry. "Ira," he began, his voice low and careful, as if afraid to scare her again. "Thank you for coming." She crossed her arms, her gaze steady but cautious. Her eyes were red, but she held her head high. "I'm here to listen, Thor," she said, her voice clear but tinged with pain, "but I want the truth. What happened yesterday? Who is Loki? And why did it feel like the whole world shook when you got angry?" Thor swallowed hard. This was the moment. He could lie again, disguise the truth as a family story, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. He had lost her once by not being honest. He took a deep breath, the air cold in his lungs, and began. "Ira, I am not like others. I come from a place called Asgard. I am Thor, the god of thunder, son of Odin, wielder of Mjolnir." Ira blinked, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. She laughed, a nervous laugh that echoed through the quiet park. "Is this a joke? Thor, please be honest. I can't handle more games." He took her hand, his rough fingers gentle against her soft skin. "I am honest," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing in his chest. "Look at me, Ira, haven't you felt it? My strength, my stories, the thunder that follows me. I am no man, I am a god, and I love you." She pulled back, her eyes full of disbelief. "That's insane, Thor. Gods aren't real. They're stories, myths. I've read them all, Thor, Odin, Loki. They're tales, not reality." He raised his hand, and Mjolnir flew from his jacket to his grasp, its runes glowing in the dim light of dusk. A faint thunder rumbled in the distance, and clouds began gathering over the park. Ira's eyes widened, and she took a step back, her breath quickening. What is that?" she whispered. "This is Mjolnir," Thor said, his voice filled with both pride and sorrow. "My hammer, it calls the storm just as my heart calls to you." Ira shook her head, her hands trembling. "This is too much. I need time." She turned to leave, but before she could go, a laugh rang out, Loki's laugh, cutting through the air like a knife. He stepped out of the shadows, clad in a green cloak flapping in the wind, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, brother, you do make it so dramatic," he said, his voice smooth but venomous. "Tell her about the time you dressed as a bride to retrieve that hammer, or when you lost to a giant in a drinking contest. A god, you say." Maury like a fool, Thor clenched his fists, and thunder boomed closer, the trees in the park bending in the wind. "Loki, begone," he roared, his voice like a thunderclap. The clouds broke, and rain began to fall, first a drizzle, then a torrent. Ira backed away, her face pale. "Stop, both of you," she cried, her voice cracking with fear and frustration. But Loki continued, his words arrows aimed at Thor's heart. "See, Ira," he sneered. "He's a god, yes, but he's also an idiot. His rage destroys everything, including you. Run while you still can." Thor could hold back no longer. He lunged at Loki, and Mjolnir flew through the air like lightning. The tree behind Loki exploded into splinters as the hammer struck, and the ground shook. Ira screamed, covering her ears, her coat soaked through by the rain. Loki transformed into a crow and flew into the sky, his laughter echoing over the park. Thor turned to Ira, his eyes pleading. "Ira, wait," he shouted, but she ran, her coat whipping in the wind, her footsteps vanishing into the darkness. Thor fell to his knees, the rain pouring over him, his heart shattered. He had tried to be honest, but his anger and Loki's tricks had ruined everything. Mjolnir lay beside him, its runes dimmed by the rain, as if mourning too. He had lost her again, and this time perhaps forever. In Asgard, Odin watched through Heimdall's eyes, his ravens croaking by his side. Freyja, who had tried to warn Thor, sighed. "He never learns," she murmured, her voice heavy with compassion. "His heart is his strength, but also his weakness." Loki, hidden elsewhere in the park, smiled. His plan had worked. Ira was terrified, and Thor was alone, but he knew Thor would not give up, and that made the game even sweeter. He began plotting his next move, a trick that would force Thor to display his full power, perhaps even summon Asgard's might before Ira's eyes. Thor spent the night on the shores of Mjolnir, his thoughts a storm of sorrow and resolve. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still grey, the stars hidden behind clouds. He gripped Mjolnir tightly, its cold metal a reminder of his duty, but his heart was full of Ira. He would not lose her. He would show her that his love was stronger than his rage, stronger than Loki's chaos. But deep inside, he knew he had learned nothing. His impulsiveness had brought him here, and he was still the same as ever. Ira, in her apartment, cried quietly. She held the wooden bird in her hand, its smooth surface cold against her skin. She missed Thor, but the fear was overwhelming. Was he insane, or was he truly a god? She had seen the hammer, heard the thunder, felt the ground shake. But how could it be real? She went to her desk and pulled out a book on Norse mythology, its pages worn from years at the library. She read about Thor, about Mjolnir, about Loki, and for the first time wondered if the stories were more than just stories. But the fear remained, and her heart was torn between love and doubt. The next day Thor tried to reach Ira again. He sent messages, but she did not reply. He went to the library where she worked, but her colleagues said she had taken time off. He wandered the park, sat beneath their oak, and remembered every moment they had shared. He saw her in every falling leaf, heard her in every whisper of wind. He decided to make one last gesture, a trip to Iceland, where he could show her the northern lights in all their glory, where he could prove his love was true. But Loki was never far. He had stolen Thor's phone during the night, sending false messages to Ira, messages suggesting that Thor was dangerous, that he was lying about everything. He also caused small disturbances in the park, a bird attacking Thor, a branch accidentally falling nearby. All to keep Thor on edge, ready to explode. Unaware of Loki's tricks, Thor planned his journey. He would take Ira to Iceland, show her volcanoes, the northern lights, and perhaps even a glimpse of Asgard's magic. But he knew Loki would follow, and that their next clash could be the last. Ira, meanwhile, sat in the library despite taking time off. She had slipped in to read more about the myths, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. She found a passage about Thor and Loki, about their eternal struggle, about how Thor's temper always led to chaos. She thought of his words, "I am Thor, god of thunder," and of the hammer flying to his hand. She wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. She decided to give him one last chance, but only if he could prove he was not dangerous. Thor returned to the park that evening, hopeful yet anxious. He sat beneath the oak, Mjolnir hidden in his jacket, and waited. The sky was clear now, stars glittering like diamonds. He thought of Asgard, of Odin, of his duty as a god. But mostly he thought of Ira, how she had changed him, made him human. He would not give her up, not without a fight. In Asgard, Odin watched, his ravens croaking. Freyja sighed, but her eyes held hope. Perhaps, she murmured, perhaps love can teach him what battle never could. Loki, hidden in the shadows, smiled. He had sown the seeds of chaos, and now he waited for the storm to break. He had a plan, a trick that would force Thor to reveal his full power, perhaps even summon Asgard's might before Ira's eyes. And when she saw it, she would run, and Thor would be alone. Thor, on the shores of Mjolnir, looked out over the water, his heart filled with resolve. He would win Ira back, no matter the cost. But he did not know that Loki had already set his next trap, and that his next meeting with Ira would be his greatest trial. Chapter 4. The last storm. Stockholm lay wrapped in the final days of autumn, where the cold had begun to bite harder, and the leaves fell like a slow, sorrowful dance to the ground. The streetlights cast a golden glow over the wet cobblestones, and Mjolnir's waters lay still, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Thor stood at the water's edge, his red cloak, now replaced by a thick human jacket, fluttering in the wind. Mjolnir rested in his hand, hidden beneath the jacket, its runes pulsing faintly as if sensing his unease. His heart was a storm of determination and fear. Ira was still gone, frightened by his divine nature and Loki's malicious tricks, but Thor refused to give up. He had decided on one final gesture, a journey to Iceland, where he would show her the northern lights, the glow of the volcanoes, and if she allowed it, a glimpse of Asgard's magic. This was his last chance to win back her heart, and he would not let Loki destroy it. In Asgard, Loki sat in the shadows of Valhalla, his green eyes gleaming with malice. He sipped from a goblet of mead, its sweet taste a contrast to the bitter joy he felt over Thor's suffering. His plans had worked so far, he had sown doubt in Ira's heart, forced Thor to reveal his nature, and scared her with chaos. But he was not satisfied. He wanted to see Thor broken, his love shattered forever. His next trick was the most ambitious yet. He would conjure an illusion of a giant in Midgard, one that would force Thor to unleash his full divine power in front of Ira. When she saw him as the thunder god he truly was, she would flee and Loki would triumph. He smiled to himself, his fingers playing with a runestone he had stolen from Odin's chamber. "Let's see how far your love reaches, brother," he murmured. Odin, from his throne, saw it all through Heimdall's eyes. His ravens, Hugin and Mjolnir, cawed uneasily, and his single eye was filled with both wisdom and sorrow. He had watched Thor struggle with his heart and his wrath, and he knew this was his son's final trial. Freya, by another fire, sighed. "He loves her, but his wrath is his prison," she said to herself, her golden hair gleaming in the firelight. And Loki, he never learns to leave well enough alone. Thor had spent the day planning his trip to Iceland. He had bought tickets, booked a cabin at the edge of a volcano, and even smuggled a small crystal from Asgard, one that could enhance the beauty of the northern lights. He wanted to give Ira a night she would never forget, one that would show her his love was stronger than his divine nature. But first, he had to reach her. He went to her apartment, his heart pounding like Mjolnir against a giant. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He could hear her breathing inside, faint and uneven, as if she were awake but afraid. He left another bouquet of roses at the threshold, this time with a new note. "Ira, let me show you my world. Meet me at the airport tomorrow evening. I promise to explain everything." Thor. Ira awoke to grey morning, her heart heavy with doubt and longing. She had spent the night reading about Norse mythology, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the pages about Thor, Loki, and Asgard. She could not deny what she had seen, Mjolnir, the thunder, the ground shaking. But to believe Thor was a god, that was too much. Yet she could not stop thinking about him, his laugh, his warmth, his way of making her feel alive. When she opened the door and found the roses and the note, she felt tears burn in her eyes. She wanted to believe in him, but fear held her back. She sat at the kitchen table, the roses in a vase, and stared at the note. The airport, Iceland. She thought of their conversations about volcanoes and northern lights, and her heart softened. Perhaps he deserved one last chance. Thor spent the day in the city, his thoughts consumed by Ira. He wandered through the park where they had first met, sat by their oak tree, and remembered their laughter, their kisses, their dreams. He saw her in every falling leaf, heard her in every gust of wind. He went to the library where she worked, but her colleagues said she was still on leave. He bought a coffee at a cafe, but the taste was bitter without her by his side. He felt more human than ever, vulnerable, uncertain, filled with hope and fear. Ira, meanwhile, sat in the library, despite having taken leave. She had snuck in to read more about the myths, her heart pounding as she found a passage about Thor and his love for humanity. He was a god of strength, but also of heart, it read. She thought of his words, "I love you," and of the hammer that flew to his hand. She could not deny what she had seen, but she could not fully accept it either. She decided to meet him at the airport, not because she believed in his divinity, but because she loved him and she wanted to understand. That evening, Thor met Ira at Arlanda, his heart pounding as he saw her approach. She was dressed in her green cloak, a suitcase in hand, her eyes filled with both determination and uncertainty. "Thor," she said, her voice low. "I'm here, but I want the truth. No more secrets." He nodded, his eyes gleaming. "No more secrets," he promised. "Come, let us travel together." They flew to Iceland, and during the journey, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Thor spoke of Iceland, of its volcanoes and northern lights, and Ira listened, her heart softening with his enthusiasm. When they landed, they rented a car and drove to a cabin at the edge of a volcano, its peak glowing in the twilight. The sky was clear, and the northern lights began to dance, their green and purple bands like a song from Asgard. Thor took Ira's hand and led her to a hill with a view of the volcano. He held up the crystal from Asgard, and the northern lights intensified, their colors so vivid they seemed alive. Ira gasped, her eyes widening. How did you do that?" she whispered. He smiled, his voice soft. "It's a part of my world, Ira. I want to show you everything, not just Midgard, but Asgard, if you allow it." She looked at him, her heart pounding. "I want to believe you, Thor. But I'm scared." He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "I'm scared too," he said, "but my love for you is stronger than any storm." Then came a rumbling, not from the sky but from the ground. The volcano awoke, its glow intensifying, and a shadow rose from its peak, a massive figure, like a giant from the myths, with eyes like glowing coals. Ira screamed, and Thor turned, his hand grasping Mjolnir. "Loki," he roared, for he sensed his brother's magic. Loki stepped out from the shadows, his laughter echoing over the hill. "Oh, brother, you make it so easy," he said. "Show her your power. Show her who you really are." Thor hurled Mjolnir at the illusion, and the sky exploded with lightning. The giant vanished, but the ground shook, and Ira fell back, her face pale with terror. "Thor, stop," she screamed, but he didn't hear, his wrath taking over. Loki transformed into a snake and slithered away, his laughter echoing. Thor chased after him, Mjolnir in hand, and the sky burst into a storm of lightning and thunder. Ira ran down the hill, her cloak flapping, her heart broken. "It's too much," she cried, but the wind swallowed her words. Thor stopped, his breathing heavy, and watched her disappear into the darkness. He fell to his knees, the rain pouring down, and he knew he had lost her forever. His wrath, his nature, had frightened her, just as Loki had planned. In Asgard, Odin saw this, his ravens silent. Freya wept, but her tears were for Thor. Loki, hidden in a cave in Iceland, smiled. He had won, but he knew Thor would rise again, and that made the game eternal. Thor returned to the cabin, alone. He looked at the northern lights, but their beauty was hollow without Ira. He had learned nothing, his wrath was his prison, and Loki was its keeper. Ira, on her way back to Reykjavik, cried, her heart shattered. She loved him, but she could not live with a god. Epilogue: autumn had given way to winter in Stockholm, and snow lay like a white blanket over the city's streets. Mälarens waters had frozen into ice, and the street lamps cast a cold glow over the cobblestones. Ira sat in her apartment, a cup of tea in her hands, her gaze fixed on the wooden bird Thor had given her. Its smooth surface bore memories of their time together, laughter in the park, kisses under the stars, and the terrifying truth of his divine nature. She had fled from him in Iceland, scared by his rage and Loki's illusion of a giant, but her heart still belonged to him. She had read about Thor in the myths, about his strength and his flaws, and she wondered if she had been right to leave him. But the fear had been too great, and she could not live with a god whose wrath shook the world. Thor stood by Melaren's shore, his jacket covered in snow, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Mjolnir rested in his hand, its runes dimmed by the cold. He had lost Ira, and the pain was worse than any wound from battle. He had tried to win her back, but his impulsiveness and Loki's tricks had destroyed everything. He thought of Asgard, of Odin and Freya, of their warnings he had ignored. He had wanted to be human for her, but his divine nature had been too strong. He knew now that love required more than strength, it required patience, something he had never learned. In Asgard, Loki sat in Valhalla's shadows, his smile pale but satisfied. He had won, but the victory felt hollow. Seeing Thor suffer had been amusing, but he felt an emptiness he could not explain. His tricks had driven Ira away, but they had also pushed Thor further from him. He tossed a runestone into the fire and watched it burn. "Perhaps next time, brother," he murmured, but his voice lacked its usual glee. Odin watched it all from his throne, his ravens silent. He knew Thor would rise again, but his son's heart would carry the scar of this love. Freya, by her fire, sighed. "Love is a storm," she said, "and Thor is its master, but also its victim." Ira decided to travel to Iceland again, alone. She wanted to see the northern lights, feel the volcano's warmth, and perhaps understand the man she had loved. Thor returned to Asgard, but his thoughts remained in Midgard. He promised himself that one day he would find her again, but he knew he must first tame his wrath. Loki was already planning his next trick, but a part of him wondered if chaos was all he had. None had learned anything. Thor remained impulsive, Ira fearful, Loki cruel. Yet in their hearts lingered a spark of hope, a possibility of change, though only a shadow. And so the world continued to turn, with gods and humans bound by their flaws, but also by their dreams.